old, blind woman navigated the dense forest path, tapping her carved wooden stick against the roots. She abruptly stopped. The sharp cry of an infant echoed from the deep brush. She reached out, feeling her way through the thorns, and her hands found a baby lying in the dirt. She called out repeatedly, waiting in the silence. When no mother answered, she assumed the child had been abandoned. She picked the infant up and carried him back to her isolated home. Because she was completely blind, she did not see the striking visual differences of the child. He did not look like the people of their land. His eyes held an unnatural, deep color, and strange, geometric markings were etched naturally into his skin. When the village women came to check on her and saw the infant, they immediately questioned his origin. The old woman sat perfectly still, delivering a smooth lie. She told them a distant relative had traveled far to leave the child in her care. The villagers were deeply curious as to why a mother would leave a baby with a blind, isolated woman, but they trusted her word. Because the infant was kept tightly wrapped in cloth, no one noticed the strange markings on his body or the unusual color of his unblinking eyes. They stopped asking questions. The child, named Zobari, grew up under the absolute care and love of the old woman. But he was drastically different from human children. He learned to walk incredibly early, moving with a supernatural agility and perfect, silent balance. Unseen incidents began to happen constantly. Zobari realized early on that his caretaker could not see his abilities, so he hid them. When the old woman struggled to carry her heavy clay water pots from the stream, she would set them down to rest. When she reached down to pick them up again, they were already sitting perfectly inside her kitchen. When she needed firewood, she would step outside to gather small twigs. While her back was turned, young Zobari would silently lift massive, heavy logs that normally required 3 grown men to carry. He would stack them perfectly next to the cooking stones in a matter of seconds. When the old woman turned back around, she found everything she needed already prepared. Zobari would simply stand in the corner of the room, watching her in complete, unblinking silence. Years passed. When Zobari turned 8 years old, the old woman fell severely ill. Within days, she died, leaving the young boy completely alone. Even at 8 years old, Zobari understood the heavy weight of grief. During her burial, he did not cry or wail like the other children. He stood at the very edge of the grave in a state of absolute physical stillness. His fists were clenched tightly at his sides. His strange eyes locked unblinking on the dirt covering the only mother he had ever known. Following the burial, the village council summoned the old woman's distant relatives to claim the boy. The relatives stood before the elders and shook their heads, completely denying any knowledge of the child or the bloodline. Zobari stood in the dead center of the council circle. He did not fidget. He did not look down. He stared straight ahead with a rigid, unnatural posture. From the back of the gathering, the king's top-ranking military general stepped forward. The general walked directly up to the 8-year-old and locked eyes with him. Zobari did not flinch or look away. The general studied the boy in silence. He observed the absolute stillness of the child, the unnatural density of his muscles for his age, and the strange, faded markings on his arms. The general raised his hand, silencing the murmuring council. He declared that he would take the boy in and train him immediately. Looking at Zobari's unyielding visual state, the general firmly believed he was looking at the physical foundation of the greatest warrior their kingdom would ever see. He was not wrong. Inside the military camps of Dhaka, Zobari's training began. As he grew, he became fully aware of his superhuman strength and unnatural agility. But he kept it hidden. He feared that if the generals and the other boys saw his true nature, they would view him as a monster and cast him out. During combat drills, Zobari held back his power. When older, much larger warriors tried to grapple him to the dirt, Zobari simply stood perfectly still, letting them exhaust themselves against his unmoving frame before cleanly sweeping their legs and dropping them to the floor. He passed every single physical test with absolute, emotionless perfection. Watching from the sidelines, the general who took him in was deeply impressed by the boy's flawless execution. Years passed, and Zobari grew into a towering, silent adult warrior. The time came for his first true test outside the kingdom's walls. The Grand Kingdom of Dhaka was incredibly wealthy and rich in natural resources, making it a constant target for rival empires. Yet, Dhaka had not lost a single battle in 500 years. Their absolute dominance was tied to their greatest ally, the Kingdom of Kanda. Though the two massive kingdoms did not share a border, they combined their military forces in times of need, rendering them completely unstoppable. To keep this alliance unbreakable, every new generation of the royal families engaged in a marriage union. It was time for the current generation's union. The Crown Prince of Dhaka was scheduled to travel to the Kingdom of Kanda. Recognizing Zobari's flawless combat record, the general assigned him as a frontline escort to protect the prince's royal chariot during the long journey. The initial journey to Kanda was a complete success. The royal rites were observed, and the escort turned around to make the long march back to Dhaka. But on the return journey, the convoy was violently ambushed. A massive, coordinated enemy force surged from the rocky valleys, heavily outnumbering the prince's escort. The attackers came prepared to wipe out the royal bloodline. The Dhaka warriors drew their blades and fought fiercely, but the enemy numbers were too overwhelming. The slaughter ran deep. Zobari watched as his brothers-in-arms were brutally cut down into the dirt around the royal chariot. Standing directly in front of the prince, Zobari realized that if he continued to hide his strength, the prince would die and the kingdom would fall. Something inside Zobari finally snapped. His physical state completely transformed. Zobari stopped holding back. His unblinking eyes suddenly ignited, glowing with a piercing, unnatural red light. The faded, geometric markings on his arms and hands, which had been invisible for years, instantly flared up and became starkly visible against his skin. He stepped forward. An entire line of 15 enemy soldiers charged him at once with heavy spears. Zobari did not draw his sword. He simply pulled back his arm and delivered a single, devastating fist directly into the chest of the lead soldier. The sheer physical force of the strike created a massive shockwave. All 15 heavily armored soldiers were violently launched backward into the air, their weapons shattering on impact. Zobari moved with blinding, superhuman speed. He moved through the enemy ranks, breaking iron weapons with his bare hands and dropping attackers with single, calculated strikes. Before the few surviving Dhaka warriors could even process what was happening, the massive enemy force was completely decimated. The surviving attackers dropped their weapons in pure terror and fled for their lives. Zobari stood perfectly still among the fallen, his eyes slowly fading back to normal and the glowing marks receding into his skin. He braced himself, fully expecting the prince and his surviving brothers to draw their swords on him in fear. Instead, the prince stepped out of the royal chariot. He did not look at Zobari with terror. He looked at him with absolute awe. The prince loudly praised Zobari's strength. The surviving warriors, bleeding and exhausted, dropped to their knees and bowed in deep respect to the man who had just saved their lives and the future of their kingdom. When the convoy returned to Dhaka, the surviving warriors spread the tale of the unstoppable soldier with glowing eyes who struck with the force of a falling mountain. Zobari was instantly promoted by the general. He was elevated to a high-ranking commander, given his own battalion of elite soldiers, and cemented his place as the most respected and feared warrior in Dhaka. Following his massive promotion, Zobari's absolute loyalty to the kingdom of Dhaka deepened. But the ambush refused to leave his mind. He knew the enemy soldiers had come perfectly prepared for a royal escort. He took it upon himself to uncover the exact conspiracy against his people. Taking only one trusted companion from his battalion, Zobari launched a silent, undocumented investigation. Relying on his perfect memory of the ambush, Zobari identified the specific language the attackers had screamed during the slaughter. It belonged to a rival kingdom bordering Kanda. But the greatest discovery was the tactical reality. The royal route was highly classified. The enemy could not have known exactly where to wait unless a top-ranking military official inside Dhaka had leaked the information. There was a mole in the high command. Zobari and his companion tracked the remaining enemy scouts for days, eventually locating their hidden forward camp. Moving with absolute physical stillness, the two Dhaka warriors infiltrated the camp completely unseen. They slipped into the main command tent, silently breaking the necks of the two guards stationed inside without making a single sound. They grabbed the enemy general, bound his mouth, and dragged him entirely out of the camp and deep into the surrounding forest. Zobari tied the enemy commander tightly to a thick tree trunk. He did not ask questions twice. He subjected the commander to brutal, calculated physical torture, breaking his fingers one by one. When the enemy general finally reached his absolute limit of physical pain, he spat out the truth. The mole who sold the royal coordinates was none other than the High General of Dhaka, the exact man who had taken Zobari in as an 8-year-old boy. The enemy general confessed that Zobari's mentor was actively planning a massive military coup to completely overthrow and eliminate the current ruling family of Dhaka. A heavy, crushing weight settled in Zobari's chest. He turned to his trusted companion and issued a strict order of absolute silence. Zobari wanted to handle this personally. He needed to look the man who raised him directly in the eyes and demand to know why. Without another word, Zobari drew his blade, executed the tied-up enemy general with a single strike, and marched back to Dhaka. Upon returning, Zobari walked straight into the High General's private stone house. He locked the heavy wooden door behind him and confronted his mentor, laying out every piece of evidence he had extracted from the forest. The older general did not panic. He stood perfectly still, offering Zobari a cup of wine to calm his nerves. Zobari snatched the cup and drank it quickly, his voice raising as he yelled and demanded an explanation for the treason. Unknown to Zobari, the wine was heavily spiked with a fast-acting, lethal poison. Within minutes, the poison violently attacked Zobari's system. His superhuman legs gave out. He crashed heavily to the stone floor, his body convulsing as he rolled in excruciating physical pain. The older general simply stood over him and laughed. He called Zobari a blind, naive fool. He loudly claimed that he was the one who made Zobari the warrior he was today, and that the boy should have stayed out of high command business and let the coup happen. Zobari screamed, slamming his fists into the floor, desperately trying to force his body to stand, but his muscles completely failed. His eyes rolled back, and he passed out flat on the stone. Believing the lethal dose had stopped Zobari's heart, the treacherous general dragged his heavy, lifeless body out of the house and deep into the dense woods just outside the city walls to hide the corpse. The general dropped the body in the dirt, turned his back, and began to walk away. But Zobari was not human. His alien physiology rapidly burned through the poison. Behind the general's back, the supposed corpse silently rose to its feet. Hearing the shifting dirt, the general quickly turned around. He froze in absolute paralyzing shock. Zobari was standing perfectly upright. His eyes were glowing with a blinding, terrifying red light, and the geometric markings on his skin were burning visibly through the dirt and sweat. Fueled by pure rage and betrayal, Zobari closed the distance in a fraction of a second. He pulled his arm back and delivered a single, devastating fist straight through the general's chest armor, instantly sending his treacherous mentor to his ancestors. The older man dropped to the dirt, completely lifeless. Zobari did not waste time. He marched straight out of the forest and directly into the king's throne room. He stood rigidly before the king and presented the full intelligence: the dead High General's treason, the planned coup, and the exact coordinates of the enemy kingdom's military camps preparing for the strike. Realizing the massive threat that had just been neutralized, the king immediately granted Zobari absolute authority, endless resources, and full command over the entire Dhaka army. Zobari led a massive, preemptive strike. He marched his unified forces directly into the enemy territory. Moving like an unstoppable storm, Zobari and his army completely annihilated the rival camps, slaughtering the opposing forces and leaving their military infrastructure in absolute, burning ruin. When Zobari returned to Dhaka, he was greeted not just as a hero, but as the absolute savior of the kingdom. The king rewarded him with massive estates of land and elevated him to the highest possible military rank. At an incredibly young age, Zobari officially became the new High General of the Dhaka army. A year into his command as High General, Zobari stood perfectly still on the training grounds. Suddenly, his unblinking eyes flickered red. A silent, violent vision overtook his mind. He saw a woman bearing his exact geometric skin markings placing an infant into a glowing metallic vessel. Her voice echoed, praying to unknown entities and apologizing for sending him to the world of men just to keep him safe. The vision instantly shifted. The sky above Dhaka physically tore open. Columns of fire rained onto the stone walls. Massive, armored beings plummeted from the torn sky, warriors sharing Zobari's exact physical build, but possessing a brutal strength that completely surpassed his own. Zobari snapped out of the vision. He realized the grim truth. Dhaka was marked for total slaughter because the alien threat that destroyed his true home had finally tracked him down. He marched directly into the royal court. Standing rigidly before the king, Zobari laid out the exact physical threat and demanded an immediate, total evacuation of the entire kingdom. The king laughed, citing Dhaka's 500-year undefeated history. Zobari turned his back on the throne and walked into the city squares, commanding the citizens to pack their lives. They stared at him in confusion, refusing to move, placing their absolute trust in the king. Zobari calculated the cost of their blind trust. He gathered his most elite, loyal soldiers. They marched into the throne room and locked the heavy iron doors. Moving with terrifying physical stillness, Zobari drew his blade. Without a single blink, he executed the king and the entire ruling council in cold blood. Despite the slaughtered king, the citizens still refused to leave their homes. Running out of options and time, Zobari issued the unthinkable order. His loyal soldiers took torches and set the outer walls and the residential houses of Dhaka on fire. The visual was pure chaos. Citizens fled their burning homes in absolute terror. Zobari stood perfectly still in the center of the inferno, his glowing eyes tracking every movement to ensure not a single person was physically injured by the flames or falling timber. The people looked back at him not as a savior, but as a monster who murdered their king and burned their city to the ground. Ignoring their stares, Zobari forcefully drove the massive crowd out of the city gates, leading them into the unknown. Miles away from the burning city, the forced march halted. Zobari's trusted companion, the man who had stood by him during his first treason, turned against him, viewing Zobari as a tyrant. The companion rallied the remaining loyalist soldiers and completely surrounded the High General. 3 soldiers charged Zobari from behind, violently swinging their heavy swords at his unprotected back. The iron blades struck his skin and instantly shattered into useless pieces. Zobari did not flinch. He did not strike back. Seeing his people safely far from Dhaka, he knew his primary mission was accomplished. Zobari powered down. The glowing red light faded completely from his eyes. He opened his hand and let his heavy blade drop to the dirt. Without uttering a single word or fighting the men who betrayed him, Zobari turned his back. He walked away in a completely different direction, disappearing into the dense treeline. The exiled people of Dhaka continued their forced march up the hilly roads. Hours later, a massive sound forced them to stop and turn around. Far in the distance, they watched the sky physically split open. Columns of fire poured down like rain onto the abandoned buildings of Dhaka. Through the smoke, they saw massive, alien beings descending from the torn sky into the exact places they used to sleep. Absolute realization hit the crowd. Zobari had told the exact truth. Filled with immediate regret for turning their backs on the man who had sacrificed his own reputation to save their lives, the elders sent warriors back to the treeline to search for him. But they found nothing. General Zobari was gone, and no one ever saw the silent warrior again. Today, when the world hears the name General Zod, they picture a comic book supervillain. They picture a ruthless alien military commander from the planet Krypton, dressed in black armor, demanding that the people of Earth kneel before him. He is known entirely as Superman's greatest enemy, a tyrant who destroys worlds. But true legends are rarely completely black and white. Long before the comic books painted him as a one-dimensional villain, The original myth of the alien commander was born in the ancient kingdoms of Africa. He wasn't a conqueror, he was a protector. He bore the heaviest burden a leader can carry, becoming a monster in the eyes of his own people, strictly to ensure they lived to see another day. So, the next time you see General Zod shooting heat vision across a movie screen, ask yourself, is he just a comic book bad guy, or is he a forgotten echo of Zobari, the exiled savior of Dhaka whose brutal reality is far more complex than fiction?